Let's be honest. When you hear the words Book of Revelation, what comes to mind? Probably plagues, beasts, cosmic battles, right? It's always been seen as this terrifying roadmap to the end of the world. A vision of the future that's captivated and, frankly, scared people for centuries. But what if we've been reading that map completely upside down?
Okay, let's start digging into this, and our first clue comes from the book itself. Revelation 19:10 tells us that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Now, think about that word, testimony. That's a witness to something that has already happened. This little verse is a huge hint that maybe prophecy isn't just about telling the future, but about powerfully proclaiming a past event.
And that right there leads us to the huge disruptive question at the heart of this whole explainer. What if the entire, sprawling, epic vision of the apocalypse isn't about what's to come, but is actually a highly symbolic retelling of an event that has already taken place? This is the core argument from author Noel Robertson Platt. He basically says that we've all kind of fallen for what he calls the apocalyptic illusion. His idea is that the book's main point has nothing to do with the future, but instead, it's a really complex and beautiful allegory for the Easter story.
So this is the theory in a nutshell. All those incredible visions in Revelation, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls of wrath, that's the illusion. It's a spiritual, otherworldly picture. But the ultimate reality that it's all pointing to, that's the historical, physical, flesh and blood story of Easter.
Okay, so the big question is why? Why would the Apostle John write this incredibly complicated code to tell a story that his audience already knew? Well, according to this theory, the answer is found in a major theological battle that was raging back in the late 1st century.
And that threat had a name, Docetism. The Docetists believed that Jesus was a purely spiritual being. They thought his physical body, his suffering on the cross, his death, it was all just an illusion, like a hologram. You can see how this idea would strike at the absolute heart of the Christian faith.
So Revelation becomes this powerful, brilliant counter-argument. By creating this massive spiritual allegory that is completely anchored to the real physical events of the Easter story, John was reinforcing the flesh and blood reality of Jesus in the most profound way imaginable. It wasn't just a story, it was a theological weapon.
So, if it is a code, how in the world do we even begin to crack it? Well, the author points to what he calls a Rosetta Stone, a key that unlocks the whole thing, and it's hidden in plain sight, right in the very first verse. Check this out. On the left, Revelation 1:1 promises to show what must soon take place. Now look to the right. In Matthew's Gospel, what does Jesus do? He tells his disciples what would soon take place on the road to Jerusalem, his betrayal, death, and resurrection. The author sees this as the very first direct parallel, the physical and historical analog that sets the pattern for the entire book.
All right, but it gets even more compelling. Let's look at how this builds into what the author calls the smoking gun of his theory. We're not just talking about random parallels anymore. We're talking about a direct, sequential mapping of some of Revelation's most intense chapters onto the core events of Easter week.
Just follow this sequence. Revelation 16, with its plagues, becomes an allegory for Christ's passion. Then chapter 17 symbolizes his death. Chapter 18 becomes his burial. And then, the famous first resurrection in chapter 20 isn't about some future event, it's a direct allegory for Christ's own resurrection from the tomb. Boom, 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 boom. Once you see that sequence laid out, it's pretty hard to unsee it.
Now, this theory doesn't just work on a grand scale. It's designed to decode specific individual verses. So let's just take a quick peek at a few examples from the very last chapter, Revelation 22, to see how this symbolic illusion maps onto the historical reality.
Okay, look at these pairings. The symbolic tree of life in Revelation is seen as an allegory for the very real Mount of Olives, a place famous for its olive trees. The right to enter the holy city in the vision corresponds to the disciples actually returning to the city of Jerusalem in the book of Acts. And that famous curse at the end of the book on anyone who alters it, that's read as a direct parallel to the very real curse that fell on Judas Iscariot. The connections are just fascinating.
So, when you start looking at the entire book of Revelation through this lens, what happens? Well, it fundamentally changes everything you thought you knew about its meaning and its purpose.
Suddenly, the apocalypse isn't a script for a terrifying future, it's a coded celebration of the past. The technical term for this is a partial preterist view, which is just a fancy way of saying most of the prophecies in the book have already been fulfilled. Its purpose completely shifts from prediction to defense. It's defending the historical truth of the gospel against that Docetist heresy,
and all those visions start to align perfectly with the symbolism of ancient Jewish feasts, like Passover, which was fulfilled in Christ's death.
When you look at it this way, the book of Revelation is completely transformed. It goes from being a manual of future dread into this incredibly profound, complex, and deeply symbolic meditation on the single most important event in all of Christian history, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
And that leaves us with one last, massive question to think about. If the most famous apocalyptic book in the entire world is actually an intricate allegory for something that already happened, what does that change about how we should read all the other prophecies of the future?